Greetings, and welcome to this exploration of one of the most unsettling instances in American history. Please let me know where you're watching from and what time you're listening to this narration in the comments section before we start. The locations and times of day or night that these recorded accounts reach are of interest to us. Professor Harold Whitaker of the Springfield Historical Society was cataloging a set of records that had been found in the basement of the former municipal building on North Limestone Street on a crisp autumn morning in 1952. Before renovations were planned, the 1,901 structure had been Springfield's administrative hub for many years. Dozens of boxes of municipal records from the early days of the city were kept in the basement, which had been neglected for a long time and had ongoing moisture problems. Previous archivists had considered the majority to be of little historical significance, but Whitaker, who was renowned for his meticulousness, insisted on going over everything before discarding it. He found a leather-bound ledger with the name Gilmore Hotel imprinted on the cover among the lost records and water-damaged papers. The pages were brittle and yellowed, the leather cracked with age, yet the handwritten entries were still readable. The 1,874-1,879 ledger included more than simply financial accounts and hotel registrations. A strange document was discovered between its pages, a small handwritten menu card with the title, Special Selections, Private Dining. The first item on the card read, Fresh cut offering served raw, market price. Whitaker's investigation would take up the rest of his academic career and ultimately result in his mysterious withdrawal from public life. By 1874, Springfield, Illinois had grown to a population of about 17,000 people. Less than 10 years had passed since the end of the Civil War, and the city once the birthplace of Abraham Lincoln was developing into a major commercial hub in central Illinois. The state capital had developed into a center of political activity, attracting ambitious politicians, affluent business people, and other opportunists looking to profit from the economic boom of the Reconstruction era. The development of railroads had linked Springfield to Chicago, St. Louis, and other locations to the east, resulting in a surge of tourists who needed lodging worthy of their position. American society had changed in the years after the Civil War. A new class of industrialists was becoming extraordinarily wealthy as the Industrial Revolution accelerated. With immigrants and former slaves at the bottom of the economic scale, the gap between the rich and the poor was growing significantly. This led to clear socio-economic segregation in places like Springfield, where the poor lived in more congested periphery and the wealthy in the core areas. The tree-lined lanes around the governor's palace and the state capitol were the main residences of Springfield's wealthy citizens in the 1,870 seconds, according to city directories and census data. They had gas lights, indoor plumbing, and other contemporary amenities in their dwellings. In the meantime, immigrant workers lived in small spaces, devoid of even the most basic amenities in neighborhoods like Badlands on the east side of the city. Many of the missing people in Springfield would later be reported from these underprivileged areas. The Gilmore Hotel, a 3-story brick building with expansive windows facing the street, was located at the intersection of 5th and Monroe. The structure included intricate Victorian details, such as beautiful ironwork and ornate cornices, according to historical architectural documents. According to records from the time, the hotel's interior was lavishly furnished with gas lights, walnut furniture, and imported carpets. Serving politicians, business people, and high-profile tourists, it was regarded as one of the city's most upscale restaurants. The Gilmore family owned the hotel. In particular, Edmund Gilmore, who supposedly made his fortune during the war in meat processing, had purchased the property in 1868. Newspaper reports at the time characterized Edmund Gilmore as a gentleman of refined tastes who was reticent but polite. Gilmore was born into a mercantile family in Boston in 1831. He had already migrated west in the 1,852nd, starting a meatpacking business in Cincinnati before moving to Illinois during the Civil War. According to tax records, his company provided Union forces with preserved meats. This arrangement seemed to be very profitable. By 1868, Gilmore had saved up enough money to buy the hotel property, which had been known as Springfield House, but had become dilapidated itself. Gilmore appears to be a tall, skinny guy with a high brow, deep-set eyes, and a well-groomed beard, in photographs that have been preserved in the collection of the Springfield Historical Society. He usually wore expensively made dark suits with a gold watch chain showing through his vest. He was an outcast in Springfield society because of his distinctive Boston accent, according to modern accounts, but his riches and business sense seemed to make up for it. Gilmore was a well-known figure in Springfield, although he had few personal friends. Reports of church services, charity events, or social gatherings that usually detailed the activities of the city's elite hardly ever mentioned him. The Gilmore Hotel was well known for its restaurant, which promoted the best eating west of Philadelphia, according to city records and ads in the Illinois State Journal. The restaurant's European-style food and cultivated elegance were hailed in recent reviews. Social columns described the main dining room as having silver service, white tablecloths, and a large wine list unusual for central Illinois at the time. More private spaces for political and business meetings were provided by a separate gentleman's dining area. The special dining service, which Whitaker discovered featured the unique serving of raw meat, was not advertised, but it was provided to a select group of clients. Considering the lack of refrigeration technology in 1874, serving raw meat would have been both unusual and possibly hazardous. Even the most affluent restaurants relied on ice that was harvested in the winter and kept in insulated ice houses. This approach allowed for cooling, but was unable to ensure the safety of raw meat for long periods of time. However, the ledger revealed that this unique choice was the most expensive item on the menu and was ordered surprisingly frequently by a select few regular customers. Questions were raised by the ledger entries. Why would high-profile visitors spend so much money on raw meat? What was the reason behind the recurrent appearance of the same 12 names in the private dinner registries? They frequently stayed at the hotel for precisely 3 nights, always during the Black Moon. Whitaker's notes reveal his increasing interest in these patterns, especially the astrological connection that implied a ceremonial aspect to these meetings. He had started monitoring lunar cycles and compared them to the dates in the Gilmore ledger, as evidenced by his research calendar that was found in his abandoned office. This confirmed a precise correlation between the presence of these specific guests and the new moon. Professor Whitaker discovered something strange when he tried to compare these names with Springfield's historical documents. Although the majority were identified as bankers or merchants from Chicago, Street, Louis, or even New York, further research showed inconsistencies. The addresses were different. It was impossible to confirm the businesses listed in hotel registrations. These visitors seemed to be limited to the Gilmore ledger's pages. But one name did produce results: Augustus Merriweather, a Philadelphia-based private investor. In 1879, the year the Gilmore ledger revealed his last visit to the hotel, Merriweather's name vanished from all public records, despite census records confirming that he lived in Philadelphia's wealthy Society Hill neighborhood during this time, albeit with the occupation of importer of antiquities. Throughout his notes, Whitaker made repeated allusions to a group he named the Society, which he felt linked these 12 frequent visitors. He discovered tidbits of evidence indicating that comparable groups were present in Boston, New Orleans, and San Francisco, among other American cities at the time. He found trends in the number of missing persons reports in each place that matched up with meetings of affluent people at upscale venues. In early 1953, he wrote, "These are not separate incidents. This is a network, a coordinated, sophisticated network operating across state lines with members in positions of influence that ensure protection from scrutiny." His notes became more and more agitated as his research progressed. Whitaker wrote a brief scholarly article about the post-Civil War hotel industry in Springfield in 1953. The article was ignored and tucked away in the university archives, although he mentioned the Gilmore's odd menu items in passing, calling them curious culinary anomalies, reflecting experimental tastes of the era. Whitaker took a job at a California institution 3 months after it was published. Prior to his departure, his co-workers observed his growing obsession with the Gilmore research. He requested that the majority of his study materials be put in storage, according to department records. Many found his hurried departure strange, especially considering his prior strong ties to the Springfield community. Whitaker wrote in a June 1953 letter to a colleague, which was found decades later, "I have come to believe that some historical investigations are best conducted from a distance, both geographic and temporal. Proximity to the subject may pose unexpected hazards to the researcher. I have encountered indications that certain interests connected to my recent inquiries continue to be actively maintained in Springfield despite the passage of decades." The letter did not elaborate on what these interests were, or what the hazards he feared were. The Gilmore Hotel was mentioned sporadically in Springfield's local newspapers between 1874 and 1879, mostly in the social sections. When notable visitors arrived, or when special dinners were held in the back dining room of the hotel. No membership list for this club can be found in any city records or social registers of the time. Although one such announcement, from May 1876, referenced a secret meeting of the Epicurean Society, which was defined as gentlemen of refined palate dedicated to the exploration of unique gustatory experiences. The dates of their purported meetings, however, coincide uncannily with Gilmore's ledger's special dining occasions and, unsettlingly, with spikes in missing people reports. Periodical correspondence and travelers' journals occasionally mention the establishment. The accommodations are of the first quality, though I found myself somewhat disturbed during my second night by sounds emanating from below my chamber, a sort of rhythmic thumping that persisted for nearly an hour, along with what I can only describe as chanting in a language I could not identify, according to a letter written by visiting businessman Charles Hargrove to his wife in Cincinnati in October 1875 and preserved in the collection of the Ohio Historical Society. When I asked the desk clerk the next morning, he assured me it was merely the kitchen staff, preparing for the day, though the hour, approximately 20 inches the morning, makes this explanation difficult to credit. The ledger contains more than simply menu items and visitor names, which Whitaker omitted from his published work, but was discovered in his private notes during office renovations in 1964. Weights, measurements, and mysterious abbreviations like HF and TM were scrawled beside the names of locals in the margins of several pages, which were written in a different hand than the official entries. The tiny reddish-brown stains on a few pages, which Whitaker had reportedly never examined, were more unsettling. As he started to link these markings with another set of records, missing persons reports from the time period, his notes showed rising anxiety about the implications of these markings. A comprehensive inventory of what appeared to be human anatomical parts was listed under the heading Available Selections on one page of the ledger, which Whitaker had photographed but later lost when the original document vanished. Each entry included weight measurements and a code that Whitaker thought matched people who had been reported missing during the same time period. The note at the bottom of the page, which was particularly unsettling, read, "All offerings inspected for quality and freshness. No signs of disease or contamination. Premium pricing for exceptional specimens." The clinical language, which was reminiscent of butchery or livestock processing, suggested a systematic approach to what Whitaker increasingly felt was the hotel's true purpose. According to city employment records, the Gilmore Hotel's personnel was mostly made up of immigrants, mostly Germans, Irish, and few Italians, many of whom knew just a little English. In 1961, Eleanor Marsh interviewed relatives of Springfield residents who shared family tales of the hotel's reputation as an odd place to work. These reports indicate that employee turnover was abnormally high, with culinary roles being especially challenging to maintain. According to one allegation, which was credited to the granddaughter of a former chambermaid, hotel personnel were not allowed to enter the back kitchen or storage sections, which were manned only by individuals Gilmore personally hired for special occasions. The grandson of a delivery guy who frequently delivered supplies to the hotel also related how his grandfather was reluctant to go to the rear service entrance. He said there was something wrong about the place. Not just the smell, which he described as like a slaughterhouse trying to hide under perfume, but the feeling that came over him whenever he approached that door. He told my father that sometimes he heard sounds from inside, not voices exactly, but something between chewing and murmuring that made his skin crawl. According to employment records, During the hotel's years of operation, a number of employees left Springfield without providing any forwarding addresses. Although there were few police investigations, some were later reported missing by family members. In one instance, a kitchen employee called Giuseppe Veraldi vanished in October 1876. 3 days after he allegedly told his wife that he had been extremely troubled by something he had unintentionally seen in the hotel's rear storage room. Despite his wife's protests, Valdi returned to work the next day and was never seen again, according to the police report, after returning home shaking and unable to talk clearly, making the sign of the cross repeatedly, and muttering about devils in fine clothes. From 1868 to 1891, when a fire damaged most of the building, the Gilmore Hotel was in operation. The Springfield Register newspaper reported that the fire was very severe, exhibiting flames of unusual color, and that by dawn, just ash was left, despite the building's brick construction. According to the report, Edmund Gilmore was away on a business trip the day before. Thus, he was not there when the fire occurred. Although the story pointed out that the hotel registry was destroyed, making it impossible to verify who was staying there at the time, no employees or visitors were reported hurt. The fire chief noted in fire department records found by researcher Thomas Blackwood in 1963 that the fire seems to have started in the hotel's back kitchen area and spread with unnatural rapidity, indicating a potential accelerant. The timing of the fire is especially suspect. It happened the day after William Crawford, a reporter for the Springfield Register, wrote a brief piece raising concerns about the disproportionately high number of missing people in the community over the preceding 20 years. Although the Gilmore Hotel was not specifically mentioned in the piece, it did point out that a number of disappearances appeared to occur during business and political delegation visits to the city. On the same day as the hotel fire, Crawford was seriously hurt in a streetcar accident and passed away 3 days later. His research materials and notes were never found again. Edmund Gilmore never restored the hotel, although he did receive the insurance money. According to city records, he relocated to Boston in 1892 and remained there until his passing in 1906. He never married and bequeathed his sizable inheritance to a business associate named Elias Thornton, whose relationship to Gilmore is unknown, according to his obituary in the Boston Globe, which called him a successful hotelier and businessman who maintained a private life of exceptional privacy. Shipping records show a man by that name made repeated travels between Boston and other European ports between 1892 and 1908, identified variously as merchant and private collector. However, subsequent researchers' attempts to find information about Thornton were generally futile. When researcher Thomas Blackwood looked through Gilmore's estate's probate records in 1965, he found an odd assortment of items, including intricately designed surgical instruments, multilingual books on subjects like anatomy and preservation methods, and a collection of what were called ritual implements of uncertain origin. Of particular interest was an itemized list of special dinnerware, including silver service pieces with unusual designs that Blackwood, in his notes, compared to ancient sacrificial implements adapted for dining use. The probate inventory stated that Thornton had claimed these items and had them removed prior to the estate sale. The Gilmore Hotel's location was abandoned for decades, turning into a deserted area that residents allegedly shunned after dark. Residents spoke of an unnatural chill that seemed to hover over the land even in the summer, according to oral histories gathered by the Springfield Historical Society in the 1940 seconds. An elderly resident who grew up across the street from the hotel said that even during the day her parents would never let her walk on that side of the street. They never explained why. She said, "But I remember my father saying once that some ground stays hungry long after it should be full." When a business building was eventually built there in 1923, tenants often complained of strange, lingering smells that were impossible to detect or get rid of. By 1937, the building had been abandoned once more, and city archives show that numerous studies into the ventilation and plumbing systems failed to pinpoint the cause of the odor, which was described as metallic, coppery, or like spoiled meat. In order to create a parking lot that still serves the neighborhood, It was dismantled in 1945. The experience of Arthur Thompson, who had a small accounting office in the building from 1927 to 1932, was maybe the most illuminating. In a letter that was discovered in family papers back in the 1972, Thompson wrote, "I was alone in the office reviewing the Bradley account when I became aware of a sound coming from the wall, a sort of rhythmic scraping, as if someone were drawing a blade slowly across a wet stone. It continued for several minutes, then stopped abruptly, replaced by what sounded like low voices speaking in unison, though I could not make out the words. I convinced myself it was merely pipes expanding or contracting with the building's heat, but when I prepared to leave, I found a small puddle of liquid had seeped from the base of the wall. It was dark, with a distinctive copper smell. The next morning, it was gone, leaving only a stain on the floorboards that no amount of cleaning could remove. If not for the discovery made in 1959 while the parking lot was being expanded, the Gilmore Hotel's history might have remained a curious historical anecdote. The ruins of what appeared to be a cellar, not shown in any city plans, were discovered by workers digging the northeast corner of the land. Within this area, which was saved by the collapsed ceiling and walls, was a tiny room with peculiar features: hooks in the ceiling, a drainage system in the floor, and walls lined with a substance that had kept them from deteriorating, a kind of resin that, according to analysis, contained peculiar organic compounds. The drainage system was made up of channels carved out of the stone floor that led to a central drain that was about 18 inches in diameter, according to the construction foreman's report that was submitted to the city engineer's office and later viewed by researcher Eleanor Marsh. Made of iron with brass fittings, the hooks in the ceiling were placed in a precise grid pattern and seemed to be built to support a considerable amount of weight. The most peculiar was the wall coating, which the chemical department at the State University later analyzed and found to include animal proteins and a shellac-like glue that produced a waterproof and surprisingly durable surface. A tunnel that seemed to connect this chamber to what would have been the hotel's kitchen area was also discovered by the construction team, although it had collapsed at some point. One employee claimed to have discovered pieces of bone in the rubble, which he believed to be from cattle that had been prepared for the hotel restaurant. Apparently, these pieces were thrown away before they could be examined scientifically. Another item discovered by the workers was a set of cleavers, knives, and other tools kept in a metal box that was sealed. Although these tools had been carefully cleaned before being stored, the metallurgist who inspected them said they were of outstanding quality and displayed evidence of heavy use. The most peculiar thing about these tools was that they weren't your average kitchen utensils. Rather, they looked more like surgical devices that had been altered for an unidentified use. The police department received the metallurgist's confidential report, which stated that the blades had unusual wear patterns consistent with cutting through dense organic material, possibly bone. A number of the tools had intricate engravings that were reminiscent of certain ancient culinary or sacrificial tools, according to the report. Particular emphasis was paid to one tool in particular, a long, narrow blade with a curved tip, much larger and heavier than those used by surgeons for delicate procedures. The metallurgist thought the handle resembled a constellation, but he was unable to determine which one it was because it was composed of polished bone inlaid with silver wire. A tiny, oddly shaped silver cup or thimble with an unknown function was fastened to the handle by a silver chain. The discovery was promptly suppressed by city officials. Workers were ordered to sign secrecy agreements about what they had discovered. The tools were placed in police evidence, and the cellar was filled in within days. On the 17th of October 1959, the Springfield Journal published a brief piece on page 7 that stated simply that historical artifacts relating to early Springfield commerce had been uncovered during construction work. No other information was given. The instruments were sent to federal authorities in November 1959, according to police department documents obtained in 1968 via a Freedom of Information request. There is no documentation of their later whereabouts or disposition. Whitaker's original notes were discovered in the university archives in 1961 by Eleanor Marsh, a graduate student who was studying post-Civil War trade in Illinois for her thesis. She started her own research because she was intrigued by the mentions of the peculiar activities of the Gilmore Hotel. Her discovery prompted her to compare the Gilmore's guest arrival dates with those of another collection of documents, Sangamon County Missing Person Reports, from 1868 to 1891. Marsh's investigation uncovered a troubling trend. Sangamon County had an average of 18.3 missing persons each year throughout the Gilmore Hotel's operating years, which was much higher than similar Illinois counties. Timing was more telling. Disappearance peaks happened within 3 days of the Gilmore Ledger's big eating events. The majority of those who disappeared were either domestic workers, transients, or residents of Springfield's less affluent environs. Their disappearances caused little official alarm. The disappearances' demographic pattern was the most alarming aspect, according to Marsh's notes, which have been preserved in the university archives. Out of the 418 people who were reported missing while the motel was open, 372 were people who had no family in Springfield, 301 were new immigrants, and 189 were itinerant workers. Notes like, likely moved on, or returned to country of origin, were common case outcomes without supporting documentation and police records during the time period, which often demonstrated little investigative effort. Another unsettling connection Marsh found was that many of the missing had worked at or close to the Gilmore Hotel in a variety of capacities just before going missing. Compared to other occupational groups, delivery drivers, laundry workers, and street sweepers, people whose jobs may require them to be close to the hotel's service areas, disappeared at far higher rates. According to one 1,877 police report, a laundress who was interviewed stated that her missing colleague had mentioned noticing something that wasn't right when gathering linens from the hotel's back entrance. Her story was written off as hysterical female imagination by the investigating officer, who closed the case without saying anything more. Marsh presented her findings to the history department's Professor Thomas Blackwood. Blackwood warned Marsh that some historical stones are best left unturned. He later wrote that Marsh had grown increasingly paranoid, claiming that she was being followed and that someone had broken into her apartment, according to his personal diary, which was found after his death in 1967. On the 12th of February, 1962, Blackwood wrote, "Eleanor showed me a note she claims was left on her desk. It contained only a crude drawing of what appeared to be a cleaver or large knife, and the words, 'Some appetites never die.' I suggested she may have drawn it herself during a period of exhaustion. The look she gave me was one of profound disappointment." Over the next few weeks, Blackwood's diary writings revealed increasing anxiety about Marsh's mental health. He said that she had started working through the night and hanging blackout curtains on her windows, and that she was becoming more and more disheveled and anxious. On the 28th of February, he wrote, "E.M. came to my office today, visibly trembling. She claims to have identified a contemporary organization connected to what she now calls the Gilmore Society, supposedly prominent men in business and politics who gather periodically for private dinners at exclusive venues. She believes they continue the practices established at the Gilmore. I told her such accusations against respected citizens required extraordinary evidence. She replied that she had such evidence but refused to elaborate. I fear she is experiencing a breakdown." Marsh left the university program in March 1962 for health reasons. She apparently relocated to her family's Wisconsin home while her thesis was still unfinished. Her whereabouts were not found for this account. The only items in a letter she wrote to Blackwood in April 1963 that was discovered among his documents were a newspaper clipping about the disappearance of a researcher in Boston who had been studying ancient dining clubs and the premeditation, handwritten comment, "It's still happening." In 1964, a set of 1,876 police reports that had been misfiled decades before were discovered during renovations at the Springfield Municipal Archives. Officer James Sullivan's report about the Gilmore Hotel was one of them. Sullivan recorded an instance in which, early on the 17th of November, 1874, he was summoned to the hotel to deal with a disturbance. Edmund Gilmore greeted him and told that some visitors had been scared by smoke from a kitchen fire. Gilmore insisted that everything was in control when Sullivan complained that he was not allowed to enter the kitchen area. He described how, as he was talking to Gilmore in the hotel lobby, he saw a man of distinction coming down the stairs, his clothes rumpled and with what looked like dark stains on them. Sullivan asked Gilmore about this man, but Gilmore hurriedly stopped him and led him back upstairs, claiming he was a visitor who had been startled by the noise. In the report, Sullivan expressed his suspicions, stating that he smelled a most unusual odor emanating from the direction of the kitchen, not like any normal cooking smell, but rather like that of a medical ward or butcher's shop. He asked for permission to look into the matter further, but his superior turned him down, citing the Gilmore's reputation as a respectable establishment whose high-profile patrons valued their privacy. Another feature in Sullivan's study caused some later researchers to wonder. What is noteworthy about Sullivan's report is his subsequent documentation. He reported seeing what he described as several large ice boxes of unusual construction, more elaborate than any I have previously encountered in a hotel or restaurant, through a partially open door to the service area. When he asked about these, Gilmore reportedly became agitated, claiming they were specialized storage for imported delicacies, and once more stressing that the kitchen was not a police concern. A brief chat that Sullivan had with a hotel staff member while he was waiting in the lobby was also recorded in the report. The employee, whose name was not recorded, stated that the hotel received special deliveries late at night, always on the same dates each month. The employee seemed alarmed and promptly excused himself when Sullivan inquired about the nature of these deliveries. Sullivan reported that when he tried to find this person the next day to interrogate him more, he was informed that the man had quit his job and fled the city. Sullivan was moved to a patrol route on the other side of the city 2 weeks after submitting this report. He left the police force 6 months later. He accepted a job as security personnel with a Chicago shipping company, which was a substantial pay raise from his police duties, according to municipal employment records. He left Springfield at the same time that he bought his family a new house in a wealthy area of Chicago, which would have cost far more than a former police officer's income. According to 1,876 tax documents, Sullivan's yearly income was over 5 times that of his prior police pay. There was never a formal investigation into the cause of this unexpected wealth. The discovery of a lockbox during the demolition of the former First National Bank building on Washington Street in 1968 provided the most convincing proof of the Gilmore Hotel's operations. Dr. Victor Massey, who was the county physician from 1870 until 1881, had his personal journals in the box. According to Massey's notebooks, Edmund Gilmore personally called him to the Gilmore Hotel in January 1875 to tend to a visitor who had become ill at dinner. When Massey arrived, he was shown to the private dining room at the back of the hotel, rather than a guest room. He discovered a man there who was in a state of significant distress, but not because of any identifiable illness. 2 more guys who looked more like associates than medical assistants were present with the man, whose name Massey did not note. Massey saw that everything was clear from the dining table, with the exception of a few empty wine glasses and what he called a peculiar metallic implement, unlike any dining utensil I have encountered. As he studied the man, who seemed to be suffering from a paroxysm of ecstasy rather than pain, Gilmore and the others conversed in low tones, according to Massey. Gilmore told him that his services would no longer be required, pressing into his hand an envelope containing what Massey described as a sum far exceeding any reasonable medical fee. Before leaving, Massey reported seeing a door to what looked like a pantry or storage room, slightly ajar. Massey had given him a sedative and was getting ready for additional treatment. This opening allowed him to catch a glimpse of what he characterized as a sight that defies medical explanation or ethical comprehension. He did not go into further detail in his journal, just noting that he departed the hotel immediately and partook of a significant quantity of spirits upon returning home. The sounds from within that room, not cries precisely, but a sort of keening, and beneath it, a rhythmic mastication. And the glimpse I caught of what lay upon that table, no animal I have ever encountered in butcher shop or medical theater has such illegible, nor do they bear tattoos and calluses that mark a human hand. Massey wrote in his journal entry for that night, written in an unusually unsteady hand, but with one additional detail crossed out, but still partially readable. 3 days later, Massey wrote the most unsettling entry in her journal. He wrote that he had received a visit from Edmund Gilmore and one of the hotel men, whom he said had the coldest eyes I have ever beheld in a human countenance. They brought with them records of Massey's previous transgressions, such as proof of unauthorized procedures performed on patients and morphine theft from the county medical supplies. Massey claims that Gilmore promised him that these things would be confidential as long as the doctor had complete control over the hotels and its visitors' affairs. Massey's journal described Gilmore's follow-up requests. He was asked to sign death certificates for people he had never examined, stating causes like consumption, apoplexy, or heart failure, starting in February 1875. Each time, the request was accompanied by a sizable sum. What was more upsetting were the times Massey was summoned to the hotel's back entrance late at night to dispose of medical waste, which he defined as nothing more than packages wrapped in oilcloth, surprisingly heavy for their size, which I was instructed to deliver to a specific location at the edge of Oak Ridge Cemetery. Massey observed that these requests always occurred when the hotel's special guests were present. In October 1876, Massey wrote in his journal that he had noticed a pattern in the death certificates he had been asked to fabricate. I have today realized something that compounds my shame. The names Gilmore provides these supposed victims of natural causes whose bodies I never examine match precisely with individuals reported missing in the days following the arrivals of his special guests. God help me, I have been concealing murders. Not mere killings, I fear, but something far worse, a form of consumption I dare not contemplate. In February 1875, Massey wrote in his last journal entry about the Gilmore, I have signed a pact with something I dare not name. Monthly, I now provide the certificates without question. I tell myself, these transients and vagrants likely met their end through natural causes or misadventure before coming into the hands of those gentlemen. This fiction preserves what remains of my sanity. From this point on, Massey's journal entries become more and more erratic as he records his increasing reliance on morphine and alcohol. In his nightmares, he describes seeing people seated around a table with their faces hidden and their hands holding instruments that gleam in the light like surgical instruments. He wrote in one entry from December 1876 that he was not invited to dine at the Gilmore in his medical position, but as a guest. He denied it and wrote, I know too well what appetites are sated in that place. I will not become like them, though the thought crosses my mind, what terrible knowledge might be gained from accepting. Up until 1881, Massey remained the county physician. After that, he quit and moved to Denver, Colorado. According to records, he never again practiced medicine, instead establishing a rare bookshop. According to reports, he poisoned himself to death in 1894. The Denver Post's brief account of his death included a partial excerpt from his suicide note, which read, The hunger in their eyes has followed me across years and miles. I can no longer bear the weight of knowing. Photographs of the Gilmore Hotel shot in 1877 for a city business directory are in the possession of the Springfield Historical Society. With the exception of one detail mentioned by architectural historian Margaret Winters in her 1966 analysis, the three-story building seems unremarkable. It has an unusually high number of chimneys for a building of its size, including one with a significant diameter that rises from the back section where the kitchens and private dining areas were located. The design of this larger chimney, according to Winters, was more common in industrial settings than in hotels, offering excessive ventilation capacity without obvious need. A thorough examination of the building's floor plan based on property records and insurance documents was part of Winters' report, which was submitted to the Journal of Architectural History but never published. The manuscript was discovered among her papers after her death in 1969. She pointed out oddities in the hotel's back section's architecture, such as walls of nearly double the standard thickness and unusual reinforcement of the floor joists in the private dining area, which suggested the area was built to bear a lot more weight than was customary for that kind of space. Her most intriguing finding, based on an examination of water company records, was that the hotel used over 3 times as much water per month as similar facilities, with usage patterns exhibiting sharp increases that corresponded with the visits of the special guests listed in Gilmore's ledger. The Gilmore Hotel used almost 3 times as much fuel as enterprises of a similar size, according to an analysis of city coal and wood delivery records from 1873 to 1878. These sharp increases coincided with the dates of the special dining occasions noted in the ledger. The patterns of fuel usage, according to Winter's analysis, point to the maintenance of extremely high temperatures for extended periods, more consistent with an industrial smelting operation than with cooking or heating requirements. Another architectural oddity that Winters pointed out was that the hotel had been built with a basement that was remarkably enormous for a construction of its time, with ceiling heights of almost 10 feet, as opposed to the usual 6 to 7 feet found in similar buildings. Her finding of a second sublevel that was referenced in the original architectural blueprints, but was not included in subsequent documents, as though its existence had been formally erased, was more fascinating. The original plans called for an enormous drainage pipe to connect this lower level directly to the city's sewer system. This was a unique feature for the 1870 seconds, when the majority of structures used cesspool systems to dispose of waste. The Gilmore's superb cuisine and modern cold storage facilities, which were uncommon for a hotel of the time, were highlighted in newspaper ads at this time. In May 1874, the Illinois State Journal published an article describing the hotel's innovative preservation techniques that allowed it to offer the freshest fare regardless of season. Gilmore had imported biscrited, specialized equipment from Europe for this purpose, but the article did not specify the type of equipment. In 1967, a fascinating link was made when scholar Thomas Blackwood found shipping documents showing that Edmund Gilmore was regularly supplied by a Philadelphia chemical supply company from 1872 to 1879. Calcium chloride, sodium nitrate, and other preservation substances were indicated in the manifest in amounts significantly higher than those normally required by hotels. Shipments marked simply as specialized implements from a Boston-based producer of surgical supplies sent to Gilmore directly instead of the hotel were more intriguing. A former Springfield telegraph office worker came forward in 1965 with an intriguing memory. According to Albert Townsend, who operated telegraphs from 1873 to 1878, the Gilmore Hotel received a peculiar pattern of telegrams. Townsend said that Gilmore would get a telegraph with what looked like a code of Greek letters and numbers about a week before each visit from the VIP guests. Townsend's account, recorded in an interview with the Springfield Historical Society, included his observation that these telegrams frequently coincided with reports of missing persons in the days that followed. Within hours, Gilmore would send telegrams to various cities, always including Boston, Philadelphia, and Chicago, with only the response, "Table prepared." Townsend also remembered that Gilmore had received telegrams from London, Paris, and Vienna, among other places abroad, on multiple times. Gilmore always replied with, "Proceeding as arranged," or "difficulties encountered, delay advised." Townsend observed that Gilmore paid handsomely for discretion regarding these communications, giving the telegraph operators gifts that guaranteed confidentiality and priority handling. These messages were always sent in code. We may never know exactly what happened in the Gilmore Hotel's private dining room. The tangible proof has been lost to time, buried, or covered by construction. Important witnesses have long since passed away. Some official records may be intentionally incomplete. All that is left are the trends, the unexplainable links between rich tourists, absent residents, and a motel that provided raw meat to a few chosen customers at specific times. The original Gilmore ledger and all other research materials associated with Professor Whitaker were reported missing from university archives in 1969. The official explanation was that several documents had to be disposed of due to water damage caused by a burst pipe. But in a later private letter to her sister, found among her belongings after her death in 1977, archive employee Ruth Carson claimed that men posing as government historians had taken certain materials, including all of the Gilmore documents, without a receipt or an explanation. The visitors spent several hours in the archive room, emerging with a single box that they claimed contained materials of historical significance, requiring specialized preservation techniques. According to Carson's letter, the visitors were 3 men in dark suits who spoke with Eastern accents and who presented identification that looked official, but which I was not given time to examine closely. When Carson asked for documentation of the removal, she was informed that paperwork would be provided later, documentation that never arrived. Even now, people still park at the lot at 5th and Monroe. Visitors may describe strange feelings, such as an abrupt chill, an unexplained metallic taste, or a brief loss of orientation. The Gilmore Hotel is not mentioned in the historical accounts of Springfield tour guides. Local historians base their questions about the establishment on general data regarding trade in the 19th century. Direct inquiries concerning the Gilmore's reputation or peculiar customs are usually met with the response that these tales are urban legends without historical foundation. Journalist Michael Corbin, who was working on a book on Illinois' unsolved mysteries in 1968, is the last known individual to have conducted a thorough investigation into the Gilmore Hotel. He went to Springfield and asked to see the Massey journals, but then he suddenly dropped the endeavor. Some stories should remain untold. Some hungers, once awakened, never cease. I will write no more on this matter. Corbin's later work was solely devoted to sports journalism until his retirement in 1983. This was all he wrote in a letter to his publisher. I found evidence suggesting that what happened at the Gilmore was not an isolated phenomenon, but part of a pattern that extends through history and continues to the present day. There exists societies influential, wealthy, protected, dedicated to appetites that normal human beings cannot comprehend. I chose to step away from that abyss before it noticed me looking into it, Corbin said in a rare 1979 interview with a true crime magazine about his abandoned research. In 1968, a final, unsettling postscript to the Gilmore Hotel story surfaced. A hidden room in the basement was found by construction workers remodeling a townhouse in Boston's Beacon Hill district, which records indicated Edmund Gilmore had bought in 1892. The police report stated that the room included drainage lines in the floor, walls covered with the same odd resin found in the Springfield cellar, and a huge table with a unique design. The most unsettling finding was a leather-bound book that covered the years 1892-1906, but had names, dates, and notations that matched those in the Gilmore Hotel ledger. 3 days prior to Gilmore's passing, the last entry was dated. Additional discoveries in the hidden room were noted in the police report, which was acquired in 1969 through a Freedom of Information request. These included glass containers containing unidentified preserved specimens, a number of photographs depicting groups of well-dressed men sitting around dining tables in different locations, and a collection of silver serving utensils that resembled those mentioned in Gilmore's probate records. According to reports, a chemical treatment applied to the emulsion blurred the faces in these photos, making identification difficult. The room was locked, the house sold, and the book's contents were never made public. Within a week, Boston police stopped their investigation, stating lack of evidence of any crime. Shortly thereafter, Raymond Sullivan, the detective assigned to the case, left the force. Despite having no known source of wealth, property records indicate that he bought a residence in the south of France that same year. The finding in 1969 of a brief note in the Boston Evening Transcript dated October 1906, 1 week after Gilmore's passing, was possibly the most unsettling. The notice was posted in the society pages and said, "The members of the Epicurean Circle wish to express their profound regret at the passing of, for example, whose contributions to our gatherings will be sorely missed. Arrangements have been made to continue our traditions under new stewardship. The table remains prepared. There is no other information about this Epicurean Circle in the public domain." Although similar notices have been found in newspapers from a number of major American cities throughout the 20th century, always after the death of a well-known citizen whose name is only their initials. There is no sign of the site's history today. The Gilmore Hotel has no memorial plaque. At the intersection of 5th and Monroe, there are no tour stops. But something remains. Maybe just the echo of a tale. Springfield is determined to forget one of illustrious visitors who came by night, of special dinners cooked in back rooms, of people who disappeared, of a hotel that catered to those with certain tastes by serving them raw flesh. There exist in this world appetites beyond normal human understanding, hungers not merely for flesh, but for something more essential. Dr. Massey wrote in the last pages of his journal, "I have seen those who indulge such appetites. They walk among us in daylight, wearing human faces. They hold positions of respect. They are welcomed into our finest establishments, and they hunger. Perhaps it is best that the whole truth stays buried."